Hey, what's up, everyone? My name's Lionel, and I'm your host for LT Productions, and you are watching I Watch You Watch. We are covering All Her Fault. It's currently streaming on Peacock. Great series. This is season 1, episode 2. I do appreciate everyone for coming to my channel. Like this video, subscribe, and you can also leave your comments below. Now let's get into this episode. Okay, so we start this episode off with a flashback of 5 years prior at Milo's birth. We see the afterbirth as far as now it's time for the parents to take the baby home. We see that Marissa's really taking care of the child, wrestling to get the child to sleep more than 2 hours a night. Eventually, while Marissa's trying to be boss or whatever she is, as far as her job, she's still up past even when the baby's asleep. One night Peter mentions, hey, don't you think you should be asleep while the baby's sleeping? She said, well, there's no way that I can get my work done while he's awake because you fool won't help. She didn't say that, I am. So then when Marissa is really at her breaking point in this whole situation, she calls on Peter to help her out. And he says, anything that you need me to do, I'll do it. BS. We still see Marissa as the one that's handling everything, and she finally broke Milo of possibly being colicky, and now we see up to 4 nights Milo has slept during the night, and then he congratulates her. You can do anything. I don't know. I think I would love to hear from a lot of women, but I think a lot of women would probably, if they could, choke a lot of these men, these husbands, because they're just so weird. And it's a slap in the face. It's like, how can I say this? It's like pretentious stuff that men will do when they know they could have helped out in the first place, but now the women have got to put on all of these capes to help be Wonder Woman for their home, while you sit back and do the minimum and think that being a provider is the best thing that you have to offer to a family that you went into a binding contract with. It's quite crazy. Anyways, the next day, this is day 2, Marissa, current time, Marissa and Peter, Marissa's looking at some videos of Milo and all that good stuff. Peter comes in and everything is still tense because of what Peter said the last night, the prior night, when he was trying to blame her for not looking at the numbers, Colin comes over and is there just wanting to know an update, what's next. There's going to be a press conference between them and then also the police, and they're thinking strategically there's going to be a ransom call. Peter is getting random text. Put that on the table because we're going to discuss that later. All right, so Jenny, she's at her home. She goes to Carrie's room, and she has this little flashback of moments where Carrie's with Jacob. Jacob was really fond of Carrie. Jenny was like, well, he adores you, Carrie. And she was being fake humble, saying, well, I think that has to do with the sugar that he's on right now. And then we find out that Jacob and Carrie go to this shop called Moe's Malted Milkshakes. That's going to play later on in this episode. And then Jenny was like, let's just say both. Sugar and just natural adoration for you. Jenny, in present time, is taking Jacob to school. And Jacob was like, well, where's Carrie? Of course, Jenny was like, she's going to be away for a while, but I'll be here to try to help, Oh, this is before she takes him to school. But anyway, Jacob is looking for Carrie to take him to school. So then as Jacob is still getting things together, Jenny talks with Richie. And she's trying to plan ahead and trying to, okay, so what are we going to do here? And basically, Richie just wants Jenny to do everything as far as the child. He doesn't want to move anything out of his schedule. She's going over his schedule. He's out by 2 or 4 or something like that. I think 4 or whatever. No, 2 o'clock. Oh, so then you can pick up Jacob and blah, 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 blah. Like, no, I can't do that. I have a quizzes thing that I have to do after. And she said, well, that's for extra credit, right? Yeah. And that's for the children. That's for the kids and all that. But what about your own child that you then donated your sperm for? Some people can be a little bit ridiculous, but it's expected. So Jenny was like, look, we can't do this. I can't keep this up day after day after day after day after day. Something has got to give. Of course, it ends again with no real resolve because Richie's not giving in because he only wants to show up for little visitations for Richie, even though they live in the same house. Jenny talks with the detectives. The detectives, and I think Richie's there too. Everything about Carrie was fake. Fake IDs, fake. The people that recommended her, references and all that. So then Richie asked her, so you didn't sense anything? And I'm so glad the detective got with him and asked Richie, so did you sense anything? And he was like, no, that's Jenny. She's supposed to handle all that. That's Jenny's job. They talk about their normal schedule that they have. And normally, I think like 7:45 she leaves or whatever, but Carrie takes over from that time. Jenny gets home at 7, and then she takes over as being caretaker of her child. And she said it like that, a little bit like that. And what about Richie's schedule? Well, he gets home around 4, but from that point, he has lessons plans. So he doesn't really deal with his child. He probably just comes in and says, hi, and then goes about his day carefree. They also asked, okay, were there different, how's the normal schedule carry, The only time that she asked for a day off was the 25th of this last month. Put that on the table. So Peter, Marissa, the bro, Brian, and sis, Leah, they're going to the press conference. Right in the car, you see Peter start breaking down. I just don't take anything really serious about Peter, but whatever. We also find out, put this on the table. Is this now? Peter took off on the 25th too. But we'll get into that in just a second. Jenny's at the school as she's dropping off Jacob. She ends up running into Sarah and some of the other parents, and they're asking, how's everything going, and Oh, it's so horrific that your nanny did this, and And she's like, yeah, did you know anything? She said no. And then she said, well, I'm helping out Marissa with this whole situation. And they asked, how does she seem? She seemed grateful. And then they said, well, she's in shock. Reality's going to hit, and she's probably going to blame you. She's going to sue you, as the other parents were saying. She just said, you got to protect yourself and keep your distance from Marissa. That's the logical thing, but this is a woman with a heart, with compassion, and probably some guilt that's along with it, so Jenny's not going to do that. Then she hears the public scrutiny. They don't really know who Jenny is, but people on different radios and podcasts about this whole situation is catching flight. Also, this is based in Chicago, and I believe that they live in some type of suburb right outside Chicago. Anyway, at the building where they're going to have the press conference, Peter is still getting a random text. I told you to keep it on the table. And then next thing you know, right after he gets a text, Marissa gets a call from a kidnapper saying, we want your son, we want a ransom, but we find out it's fake. I feel like Peter set that up, in my opinion, but y'all can give me your thoughts below. Marissa goes into what she was reading last night in regards to having a positive public image and all that good stuff. We have to present ourselves in a certain way in order for people to want to have the desire to help us out more. At the same time, Leah, she's seeing a bunch of stuff going on where she sees folks trying to snap pictures and videotape them as they're right across the hall, and Leah just blurts out, what's taping us, causing a scene and all that. Marissa leaves the scene and is like, can you take care of her? Because she's normally a mess anyways. And then Peter tries to say, no, we can't be doing all this, Jenny shows up at the press conference and takes Marissa to the side, and they go into a different room and help Marissa set up a website for Milo and all that good stuff to help find him. To calm her nerves, Marissa wants to know, did Carrie ever harm Jacob? Because she's trying to imagine what this person is possibly doing with Milo. Is she being nice? Is she being terrifying to my child? And Jenny just says, no. She paints the picture and gives the image of what Carrie is. a time where Jacob had a cut. She made a splint out of a pineapple, a popsicle stick, and all that good stuff. She was always tender, loving, caring to Jacob. And she said, you know, what you're feeling or what you're thinking is fears and not facts. And Jenny asked, you know, is there anybody that you can call? And she said, you know, even though I talk a lot, you know, I'm really an introvert. So really no. I lost touch with a bunch of people that I went to college with and don't really have that much of a relationship even with my parents. Don't y'all think that that's kind of odd? She says that her only social circle is Peter and his family. And they come with a lot of baggage. That's interesting, Marissa. So let's put that on the table too. She says, you know, it's hard to make friends when you're busy. That could be understandable, but you also make time for what you want. And possibly you don't want it for whatever reason. She says that's, Jenny says, Marissa's thinking, okay, you probably think I'm weird. She's like, it feels like it's cozy to have it that way, but whatever. But you still have no outside external connections outside of Peter. That's odd to me. Then Jenny kind of makes this humorous joke. She laughs, and then Marissa feels guilty for laughing while her Milo is away. And Jenny was like, no, no. Then Jenny tells Marissa about the 25th of when Carrie took off. We then go back 3 weeks prior. Peter, Marissa, and Milo are on the beach. And they're getting together what Milo's birthday would be like. And Milo says that he wants a malt cake. Thursday, the 25th, Milo needs to go to the dentist. She's asking Peter, can you do this? And he was like, no, I'm gonna need you to handle that. Did he say that he's gonna be on the conference that day? All that good stuff. Because she was like, I know Banana can't really do that, and that it needs to be an actual parent to do it. So, but he reneged on it, and Marissa had to do it. So, in present time, Marissa calls Peter's office and talks to Carlos, I think it was, about, his schedule. We're trying to figure out a timeline of certain things going on. Can you tell me about the 25th and the conference that Peter had? And Carlos was like, I think that Peter must have had something mixed up, because on the 25th, he was just off for no reason. Dun dun dun. So then the detectives go by Anna's house and they talk about, did you ever talk with Carrie? She's like, no, we just smiled and just were polite to each other, And she would be very protective of Jacob and didn't want him to fall. Like, he would love to climb, and he didn't want her to, she didn't want him to fall, Can you tell us about the 25th, Anna? What was going on? She said, well, Marissa had a dentist appointment, and I came to the house around 1 p.m. Marissa and Milo had not made it there. Was anyone else home? She said, yeah, Mr. Irvine was there. However, he left the house before Marissa and Milo got home. At least Peter was around up until 1 o'clock or so. A little bit after 1 o'clock. Timeline. So then the detectives were like, well, what park did you go to? She said the one on Lombard Street. And the detectives were like, well, there's a couple of parks beforehand that you could have went to that were in closer proximity. What is the word? Lord, I can't even say the word right now. It's a closer location. So she was like, well, there's a milkshake place there, and Milo loves those, and we usually get that. So that's why we go to that park. Remember what we have on the table. And then later on, they walk outside. The detectives walk outside and says, do you think that Peter is capable of kidnapping his own child? Detective Alcaraz was like, well, I think that he's capable of keeping secrets, or keeping a secret. Peter with his siblings. He's looking at Brian. I guess he's very attentive to him. Brian likes to operate independently, and he doesn't say all the things that he needs to say sometimes, or speak up about the things that he needs to speak up about, like if he's in pain or whatever. So he sees that Brian is, and he said, I knew you were in pain. Peter said to Brian. And Peter's checking out Leah's social media. She's like, look, I took off all the embarrassing pictures and all that so that they could really help, blah, 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 blah. And he's looking at photos of Milo with Leah. She was a perfect aunt, Peter tells his sister to keep acting out, and for Brian, keep getting sick, because I need to be needed or I'm going to lose my mind. You kind of go, huh? And then you're like, well, I guess that helps. But then the sister was like, yeah, I can do that. Like, what? What? Like, it's a little bit weird that he would ask for those special requests. But whatever. I want to keep that in mind too, because that could be a whole different type of thing that's going on with Peter that we just don't really understand in regards to the weight and responsibility is on him, and somehow he gets a drive out of being needed in that way. Then next thing you know, Peter checks his phone, and there's a text message from an unknown number. It says, "Got your message, let's talk." Peter goes outside and then breathes in deeply and exhales very dramatically. And then he calls that person and says, "What is it going to cost to end this? You and me, a single financial transaction, and it's over. No one ever knows. Name your price." Peter's got secrets. Things are lining up or packing up against him. Okay, so Marissa calls Colin and bluntly says, "Is Peter having an affair?" What? No, if I thought that Peter was having an affair, I would tell you. Colin, I'm going to call BS on that. It's always the mandate is bros before hoes, even your wife. That's not a hoe, but stop it. Marissa asked, do you think it's possible? And he said his most honest answer, I don't know. So it's a way to not incriminate himself. Colin thought about doing something more. He knows the billboards, the website, but what if we set up something where we do something more door to door to ask different ones about where Milo's whereabouts, possibly to find clues. She's down for that, and he said he's going to get right on it. The press conference begins, and then it goes to hell. And they rake Marissa over the coals, talking about this rumor of them faking this kidnapping so that they can get money. Finally, Marissa and Peter were escorted away, and Marissa kind of just crashes out in regards to that. Peter confesses that a reporter had reached out to him about this being this fake thing. He thought he had everything under control, and that's why he didn't say anything to Marissa. So that's what the call was about, Peter? Okay. And then just Marissa blurts out, "Are you sleeping with Carrie Finch?" What? I never met Carrie. And then he was trying to reassure Marissa, there's no woman that I would ever consider cheating on you with. Okay, Peter. And then Marissa was like, "There's holes on the 25th. You weren't at a conference. Where were you?" Well, I met with a surgeon for hours to see if there is a special surgery that could happen for Brian. I found out that it's not going to work anyways. And the reason he didn't tell Marissa is because he knows that it wouldn't be covered by insurance, and he wanted to get all the specifics for even trying to come to her about whatever the finances it would take to actually make this happen on the 25th. So at that point, Marissa apologizes. The detective goes and talks with Peter, like, what's the name of the surgeon? We find out financially and what he's responsible. Of course, Brian lives with them, but also works for Peter. He's a day trader. And then the detective brings up that Leah is an interior designer, but her last project was 3 years ago. And then Peter was like, "Yeah, that was for us. She did renovations." So then she was like, well, the detective was like, "So you got all these extra finances where you basically bankroll your brother and sister, and you guys work for yourself? And then also you paid for everything for her, Leah. And then if anything pops up, meaning if anything disastrous happens with Leah, you're responsible for it." Interesting. There's always a mess to clean up, and you're just willing to do all that. Then Peter confesses that Brian wasn't always disabled. There was an accident, and it was Leah's fault. That's interesting that he would blurt that out the way that he did. So he's not that protective of them, but for some reason he feels responsible for them to make sure they're okay. But at the same point, you're kind of rolling the bus over Leah, even though I don't think anyone's suspecting anything out of Leah yet. The detectives talk, and the other detective finds Carrie's car. It's at Vernon Hill. It's abandoned. And they obviously know that this was some type of drop-off point. And Alcaraz says that Carrie wasn't working alone. Jenny and Marissa, they meet up. There's a phone call, and it's Tammy's Sweet Shack. Marissa had been looking around to see if there was some type of malt cake that was going on for Milo's birthday. And she said, well, I don't really have that, and da-da-da-da-da. Jenny takes the call and just said, no, we're not interested, thank you, and hangs up. Yeah, Milo's birthday was this coming up Saturday. And Jacob, Jenny says, well, you know, Milo keeps talking about this malt cake. I don't really know what he's talking about. And then Jenny says, well, Jacob has malt shakes. You know, I didn't really correct him, but the correct term is malted milkshakes. And she also says that Carrie would get Jacob these milkshakes at Mo's Malted Milkshakes. And then Marissa was like, would she get one for Milo? Jenny ends up checking the transactions from Carrie, and the total's usually $12.59, and it doesn't really add up with the prices between the child and adult. So they start checking down when was the last transaction, last Tuesday at 3:33 p.m. Marissa checks her transactions for Anna. She is getting shakes, or getting something from Mo's Malted Milkshakes. And they see that the last transaction was at 3:35, and they're going back up dates by dates, and they're comparing notes. It's usually like 2 minutes apart from each other when Carrie is making transactions and then Anna making transactions every Tuesday. So Marissa put together, oh, they were friends. So next we see Anna. She's crying, looking at the news. It looks like she's on the run, but I'm not for sure if she's on the run, but she's getting in her car. Next, we see Carrie. Carrie is now putting on a dark wig along with contacts. And then next thing you know, you see Milo appears. They're in this area or in this room or whatever. And Milo brings up, oh, you changed your hair, da-da-da-da-da. And Carrie was like, well, maybe we should change yours. Milo says, my mom would get mad. And then Carrie says, oh, your mom trusts me. Everything will be okay. There's a knock at the door. She says, remember that thing that I taught you about hiding? I need you to go do that. She pulls the curtain, closed or whatever, and a woman comes. It's Louise. She's the co-owner of the property that Carrie is renting at right now, and she wanted to meet Carrie because Carrie came on the 25th while Louise was out of town. Obviously, that was strategic. They talked briefly about the kidnapping, and it's now rumored that the parents wanted to fake this or stage this to get a ransom for free money and all that good stuff. So Louise said, you said that you wanted an extra key? And she said, yes, I'm expecting company. Wow. So yeah, so that's all that happened on this last episode. We're cooking, y'all. I don't know where this is going, but Peter is guilty, Anna is guilty, Marissa's guilty. Carrie's guilty. And Marissa's a little bit funny for me. Why would you just seclude yourself to your husband's family and friends? I say keep that on the table. But anyways, I'll be back with you on during this week at some point. It's not going to be won't be daily, I don't think, but I'm going to try because I have other things that have to be recorded, but we shall see. I appreciate everyone for coming to my channel. Tell me what you think as far as to what's going on. And like this video and share it, subscribe. Until the next one, peace.